Welcome to AgriUT Conversations podcast. Welcome to AgriUT Conversations podcast, a space where inspirational leaders meet to discuss challenges and solutions our planet and its people face today. We intend to capture these conversations to increase awareness, encourage engagement, and inspire others to follow in the steps of these leaders striving to make the world a better place. Today we have David Davies, currently based in Brisbane, Australia. David has over 30 years of experience in innovative applications design and has founded and served as CEO for fintech, software as service, aka SaaS, and mobile companies with great success. David is the founding CEO of AgUnity, who we'll hear about more shortly. And I've had the pleasure of working with David for the last 3 years, so I'm thrilled to bring David's story, expertise, and insights to this episode. Hi, David. How are you doing today?
Well, and thank you for the invite, Carmen.
No worries. Great to have you. I'm very excited to share your story with those who haven't heard it. So I know it very well, and I'm sure a lot of listeners will as well. But let's start for those who don't. Introduce yourself and let us know a little bit about your background.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up David Davies. I grew up in a wheat and sheep farming area out in outback South Australia. And I was sort of drawn to technology at a very young age. I'm quite old now, so I built my first computer from a kit from Dick Smith Electronics. And it took me like a day to put it together and about 8 months to actually get it to work. So I learned to program in assembly language and all these, strange things, and went through the first, it was basically the first generation of real personal computer programming. So I worked kind of all over the world, first in Adelaide, Melbourne, Sydney. Then I moved to Hong Kong, London, and that's where the sort of real. I travelled around the world before London, but yeah, then I had a friend working at UNESCO in London. He told me how to put a grant application into UNESCO, and we put in a kind of crazy one that was to take powered paragliders and film the UNESCO World Heritage sites from aerial footage. So, and lo and behold, they actually approved it for half the amount we asked. So we put the rest of it together, and I spent almost a year traveling around West Africa, going to places like Bank de Arguin, Dogon Escarpment, Ildegoree, and most prominently Timbuktu, where we spent about a week. We drove around the north side of the Niger River, into Timbuktu across sand dune city, and then flew over Timbuktu for a week. Flew over the Dogon Escarpment, which was great. Lots of other fascinating places in West Africa. So that was what gave me a really good grounding on how life was like in these developing nations. So paragliding in those places was fascinating. You'd take off, and by the time you landed, you have streams of people coming from other villages to see what was going on. And you'd often take off in an empty field and land for like thousands of people who had appeared out of sometimes nowhere. You're not even sure where they were coming from or where there were people around. So when that finished, I headed to Japan, and I started working for a company, and then ended up acquiring a division of that company. And that company got acquired by a NASDAQ-listed company. And what we mainly did was actually doing work for the big banks, which is my previous experience. But we also created Japan had the first web browsing mobile phones, first created by, everyone probably knows iMode and Docomo, but there was actually two competing networks, and they had completely incompatible systems. And so we built a middleware product that just let one set of content display on three, which is, everyone does that now, but at those days it was groundbreaking what Docomo had done, but also what we did. And, we created that at first for New Skin, and we had actually a big release of that in Tokyo, where their annual convention, where they had Tokyo Dome almost full, and all the New Skin distributors could see what their sales were and stuff. Again, really simple in today's, but at those days, groundbreaking. You could do that on your phone, and we made a simple version that could access your Outlook, so you could actually read, not create, but read your office emails on the phone. And so that company got acquired by a NASDAQ listed company in the US. And again, I was taking a break and then got invited to do a job at Goldman Sachs, where I worked for a few years and built a pretty important project there called Technology My Desk, which they still use to this day, and it's probably still one of the best provisioning systems in the world. And that won their Global Innovation Award. And because it was a prominent project, they immediately wanted to move the project to New York, where all good things have to come from. And so instead of moving to New York, which I don't really like, I moved downstairs to Lehman Brothers, and I ran Treasury Asia for Lehman Brothers right up into the crash. So very exciting stuff, because Treasury keeps the bank funded. So we probably gave Lehman a few extra weeks of life by doing our job really well. And then that happened. Nomura acquired Lehman in Asia and Europe, so I worked at Nomura for a while, and then I got recruited into Standard Chartered Bank to become global head of market data.
Amazing.
Which is a pretty big and interesting role.
Mm.
Because I'd started some little sideline businesses on the side, I had the ability to run a company, and we actually set up another company in Singapore called Cost Optics that did cost allocation for companies, and that one also got acquired. And just as that was getting acquired, John Freeman and myself were working on a kind of a new type of blockchain, kind of a hybrid of blockchain and BitTorrent, if anyone's familiar with those. So not a blockchain per se, but more of an encrypted communication protocol. So we'd been working on that. I got invited to attend a conference in London, a fintech conference, and I couldn't go because I was meeting ASX in Australia, and so I sent John along. He found out there was a hackathon on the weekend, entered it on a bit of a whim, and that's the origin of AgUnity. That John was talking to me in Australia, and we came up with this idea of, the hackathon was fintech for good. So we were trying to do something for good. The prize that we really wanted to win was to Singularity University's prize. And Singularity University, for anyone that doesn't, it's not a university, it's a kind of a think tank accelerator from California, headed by Peter Diamandis and Ray Kurzweil. And they're people behind the X Prize. They like to do big moonshot stuff, right? X Prize was to get a private rocket into Earth orbit. And so they like to do big ground-changing things. So we tried to come up with the biggest world-changing idea we could, which was, there's 500 million very small micro farmers in the world who have a lot of problems with efficiencies. And we thought, well, mobile phones, blockchain, better coverage, let's make a solution, just helps them do their day-to-day stuff. So that was AgUnity. And so we won that hackathon, and we had Gates Foundation and UNICEF both beeline to John after he won their thing and say, look, we see this problem all over the world. You've really nailed it. We want you to take it seriously. And then Gates said, Gates said, if you need any help, come to us. And 6-7 years later, we might finally get actually a grant from Gates. But it was their motivation, and they were emphatic about, they set up projects all over the world, and ultimately, like helping farmers lift their knot. Ultimately, you have to leave them to their own devices. And the problem is, if you've got very low-income farmers in developing nations to essentially do bookkeeping and keep records of things, they'll make mistakes. And the nature of things in those communities is, if there's mistakes, the trucks breaks down and the whole thing falls apart. So that was the real message, that farmers need a really good record-keeping system so that they can trust and cooperate with each other. And at the end of the day, that's what AgUnity does. We improve trust and cooperation among groups of smallholder farmers all around the world.
And I think that's always been the most inspiring thing for me since I first heard the AgUnity story, is we take for granted how important simple things like trust and cooperation, and even just simple things like being able to record the transactions for your business, because all these farmers are running their micro enterprises and everything's paper based. And when you don't have that trust, cooperation, or record keeping, it's a fundamental foundation that impacts the way that they run their business and how they can scale and how they can access, other things like microfinance and insurance. And it's that simple story that has always been the foundation that inspires me to, go out in the field and see how we can help these farmers. So, yeah, quite amazing. And also the hackathon, the story coming out, this idea coming from a hackathon, how important it is. Can you imagine if you never attended that hackathon?
We would have never done it.
Would have never come up.
AgUnity is a total accident, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And to your point about the trust, and it's interesting that we come from a farming community in Australia, and people hand over truckloads of wheat and get a docket of paper, and they don't care because we've got systems to fix that. In countries, like Ethiopia and Papua New Guinea, if you don't get cash on the spot, probably not going to get paid. And cash economies create a whole lot of problems. We work with vanilla farming unit communities in Papua New Guinea, and they literally take 50 caliber machine guns on the truck when they're going out to pay people for vanilla, because it is so dangerous, because they're carrying a big amount of cash around. It's the only way they can buy the vanilla from the communities. And that's those sorts of things we can make radical changes for. And what's important is those problems, because those are problems we haven't seen in Australia or Europe for over 100 years. We've kind of, and it even includes the development agencies. Often they've forgotten those problems exist, and that's at the heart of what you have to solve. If you solve that and give the farmer a platform, then all the other stuff works a whole lot better.
Yeah, it allows the ecosystem to flourish a lot more because it's on the basis of that trust. Yeah, really important. And so AgUnity has been around 6 years now, just over 6 years, and it's been a massive 6 years. Tell us a little bit more about the traction that AgUnity has experienced over the last few years, maybe some of the regions we've worked with, and anything else in that area.
Well, we work everywhere from Central America, a lot in Africa, right across to the Pacific. So we're in about a dozen countries now. It's been a long slog, and it's interesting. Like now we can get investment and support a lot easier than we could in the early days, because, and this is an interesting problem in the startup community. Like we were doing something kind of radical and telling a story that not many others had seen. Like we're going to give farmers phones, a lot of things that aren't the normal way of doing things, or not the way that people are used to. Everyone's telling us you should just make a downloadable app. Well, what's good at that if the farmer hasn't got a phone? And then even if the farmers do get phones, they're going to get all sorts of phones, and you've got a support nightmare. So we did a lot of things in a very different way. So we had a really hard slog for the first 3 or 4 years, even though we were out in the field and spending time with the farmers. And, one of the things that, should never be forgotten is that John spent the first year of AgUnity's time living in Kenya in a house and John's a lawyer, by the way, right? So one of the things you should always do is send your lawyer to live in the jungle. But John literally lived in a small village and really got connected with the farmers. And then we learned that that's so important. We spend an inordinate amount of time in the field with the farmers, learning from them what works, learning from them what their problem is, and then just building a solution to solve that problem. So we've known very clearly what we needed to do. But the problem was, when you express that to a Western audience or a venture capitalist, they often think, oh, why don't you just, they come to you with a whole lot of, you should do this, without actually having that experience in the field. So it took us a long time to get over those things and prove ourselves. And now we've got quite substantial projects. We've got partnerships with everyone from USAID, a World Food Program, to GIZ, to DFAT in Australia. And we're starting to talk, some of our projects, like at the moment, we're typically working in the hundreds to thousands of farmers in a particular region. But we've got a couple of projects now that will push us into the millions over the next few years. And there's actually, we call them our moonshots, but we've got 2 that are actually coming together right now. So we've got 2 really big ones they'll reach certainly tens of thousands of farmers pretty soon, and then hundreds of thousands leading to millions. And we've got 5 others that we're working on that we won't get them all, but ultimately we will get quite a few of those, and we'll see AgUnity with communities of millions of farmers, which is when things get really interesting. Because AgUnity is not an applet in the normal sense of things. It's a platform. We give the farmers a specially altered phone. We give them it's a super app. It boots straight up into it. It's got a simple interface using geometric shapes and primary colors. Thank you, Keith Nielsen. So the farmer just presses the green triangle when they're handing over their crop. And so it works for people with low literacy. It also works when there's no signal, because we've got our comm channel in our phone. So farmers can do transactions with phone to phone with QR codes, even if one of them's, even if both of them have got no signal. So that's very important. We can brick the phone. There's a lot of functionality that we do very specifically to suit these needs. So our phones are really unlike any other. Now, they are still a normal Android phone. It's got all the normal stuff on, and we can make phone calls, but our platform is a specific part of that. And one of the things we've very proud of we've done is created a pushable applet interface. So other parties can create, say, a microloan app or a farm advice app, or here's where here's your COVID vaccination, or any of these things, right? Other people can create those and push them down to the farmers without the farmer having to understand how to use an app's Play Store or any of that functionality. So that's very important, how we've constructed these phones to specifically meet that need. And that's why what we do is very unique. And back to the point is, when we get into the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of users in a particular market, we can go to all the other services in those countries, the banks and the insurance companies, and open up our group of farmers to a whole lot of other services that normally are not available to them. And, to your earlier point, Carmen, about the data that we're collecting, a lot of these farmers can't get insurance because they can't prove that they've, got crops. They've been, all that information's there. And because we're putting it on the phone platform, we've suddenly got it. So that farmer can get a microloan, they can get insurance. And those things are transformative to the farmer, because, at the moment, if they borrow money, it's probably a 50% per annum interest from local loan sharks.
Yeah.
And they might not be allowed to pay it back. Like there's very horrible implications when a farmer desperately needs some money. Whereas money markets nowadays, once we get the farmer organized and get it all recorded, they can start to get loans at 10%. And that can be transformative, because that can help them buy that equipment they need, or get some more seedlings for their farm. They can earn extra income.
Provides them access to digital and financial inclusion that they would have never had before.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's so important about why we do it the way we do it is, I think the most critical aspect is we don't leave anyone behind. There are tons of other farming solutions out there, and we see them all around the place, but typically they're for the wealthier, more educated farmers that have things like bank accounts that, our farmers can't dream of. And farmers, bigger farmers that can pay for things online. Because how do you sell a software package to a farmer that hasn't got a bank account? And, you're not actually going to run around in New Guinea and collect $1 a month from the field.
And the simple concept of trying to explain to the farmers how they can get a bank account and how they can utilize all these platforms can be very complicated for them.
Even getting them to download something and update it, when you've got an application update, just getting farmers to update an application is really complicated. And so one of the things we try to do is make sure we've created a phone for the lowest common denominator. The farmer that, and we target that as someone who has almost no education, so they can't read, more than basic things, but almost everyone has numeracy. They can understand numbers. Farmers that live in an area with no connectivity, farmers that don't have a bank account, and farmers that have often never owned any technology before. So that's the base model. We want to make sure that we have a lot of people just like that. And we want to make sure that they're not at a disadvantage compared to someone who has got those things. Because if there's about 500 million of those particular farmers. And so if we leave them behind, we've done a terrible disservice to the world. And that's really the challenge with a lot of other solutions, that they really don't try to target that bottom of the market, which is where AgUnity operates.
Fantastic. So there's a big white space, and we're really trying to support that lower rung of the last mile that, can be challenging to reach. Definitely. I think this leads nicely into, you were instrumental in the creation of AgriUT Foundation, with the rest of the team. What was the vision behind that?
Well, look, AgUnity solves a lot of very important problems in the supply chain. And as a result, we've seen some of our communities have tripled their income in a season. And that's just, really that's just we're reducing wastage. Like, there's inordinate amounts of food waste in developing nations, but it's actually much worse. Sorry, in developed nations, but it's actually much worse in developing nations. You get situations where farmers are growing something and 50 kilometers away, people are short of food and they just don't know. So we solve those problems. We reduce a lot of waste in supply chains, and that leads to farmers having much better incomes and a lot more food getting where it to go. And we create trust, we get them to marketplaces, all these things we can do. But there's one thing AgUnity couldn't do, and it was troubling us. And that's that for a lot of the commodities that are sold into developed markets, what's happened over time, and use coffee as an example. 30 years ago, a low-income farmer would probably get between 10 and 15% of the value of that coffee in a developed market. Nowadays, that number's less than 3%. So we, in the last 30 years, have come to pay so much more for our coffee because it's a luxury product and it's a good product. The farmers get the same amount or less because everyone in the supply chain is taking more, but they're the forgotten people. And they're the most important ones, right? Because if we want good coffee, they're the ones that actually make good coffee. At the moment, we're kind of forcing them to make good coffee rather than rewarding them for making good coffee. And the same happens in a lot of the other big, the 6 major commodities that almost predominantly come from smallholder farmers in developing communities is coffee, cocoa for chocolate, vanilla, tea, coconut products, which are used in all sorts of cosmetics and other things. And then finally, spices. And we all use these, you find me a person that doesn't use one of those and I'll find you
on a daily basis.
So everyone uses those products all the time. But what you've got to realize is the people that are making those projects are actively being exploited, like all the time. So when you enjoy a cup of coffee or a bar of chocolate or some cosmetics, you're really enjoying that at the cost of someone who's worked below slave wages, and their situation is getting worse. So AgriUT was meant to be a way that we can connect the consumer to the farmer and say, hey, you might not get being paid fairly, and I can't fix the supply chain, I can't fix all the other things happening to you, but at least I can give you either the coffee company, because so many coffee companies want to be ethical, but they're so far removed from the farmers that if they pay more, the farmer's not going to get any of it. We work with Fairtrade. Fairtrade is probably our biggest customer at the moment. We work with them extensively, and they are the gold standard. But even they probably get a quarter of the extra money back to the farmer, and they've got elaborate, complicated systems in order to do that. If for a small coffee company, cafe that wants to do the right thing, they can release money. They can use AgriUT to release money directly to the farmers, make sure the farmer's getting paid fairly or at least a bit better, and the consumers can do that as well. So we just want to give some choice to enable people and companies at this side of the world to do the right thing about the people who would otherwise essentially be exploited. And that works very complementary to AgUnity. We already had farmers earning through our phones. They see their income through the phone. So adding a digital token to that system was kind of self-evident, really.
Complementary. And I know there's a lot of other use cases for AgriUT around carbon credits. We don't have time to go into them today, so hopefully we can have an episode, later on. But there's so many opportunities with this digital token enabling a farmer in a remote region that's never been digitally connected before to be able to access a digital token that they can utilize to purchase goods and services or to get involved in the carbon credits market is huge. So I definitely have on the list for us to revisit the carbon credits topic in another session. I'd like to take a different angle. So I love your passion around the true meaning of crypto and blockchain and why crypto was created. And I know you've got very strong views around this and around Satoshi's vision. Do you want to touch on that just a little bit of like why on how you think crypto is meant to be playing out in the world and how it's not?
How it is, yeah. The animals looked from pig to human and human to pig and pig back to human. And already it was impossible to tell which was which. And coming from the financial industry and looking at the crypto industry, I often feel the same way. It's very Animal Farm-esque, right? Crypto was meant to solve the problems that caused the GFC, that we can't trust central governments. We need, independent currency that nobody's manipulating, that's not used for for wealthy people to get wealthier, because that's what happens in financial markets. Like everything, all the systems that we're living in it with at the moment, and currencies have been created to support national governments, but then national governments use them for their particular purpose, and that's not necessarily the purpose of people. And if anyone reads Satoshi's original vision for cryptocurrency and the original community discussions that were around about that time, that's what it was about. It was about revolutionaries. It was a revolution for the financial markets. It was creating something that fixed this problem of central currencies that were being manipulated to serve people. And then what's happened? It's become pretty much, I can't tell the difference.
It's become about Bitcoin and making money.
DeFi and manipulating and, let's become a whale, let's pump and dump, let's get Lamborghinis. Like, if you want to do that, go to the financial markets. Like, it's not what crypto was meant to be. Crypto was meant to be changing the world for the better. And I think crypto as a technology can absolutely do that. And I think the fact that it created an opportunity for a lot of people to make a lot of money really easily has led to it getting a very, very bad reputation. There's a lot of, there were a lot of scams, there were a lot of, things that went up and down, a lot of volatility in markets, again, caused by people manipulating markets, which is what I saw a lot happen in the financial industry. And so maybe it's time, crypto is still only a teenager. So maybe it's time for it to start like fulfilling its vision, becoming something that is a force for good in the world. And I'd also like to take like one step back from that. I don't think it's crypto that does it. I think crypto is just the enabling means for us to do new things as a society. A lot of the criticisms of, a lot of the layperson criticisms of cryptocurrencies is they're not real. Well, currencies are not really real either. Currency is just a way of denominating like that we trade and things. Like, it was created for that purpose, but there's nothing real about currency. We just got used to the fact that it's always around and it's backed by governments and blah, blah, blah. So we perceive it as real, but it's no more real than a digital currency. I think what is missing in digital currencies is them being wrapped around a purpose, like alleviating poverty or addressing climate change or marine conservation, which is what we're working on in one of our other projects. There's a lot of things that if you create a theme, and then the digital currency is like, most technology solutions. It's not about the technology you use. You could use, one database or one programming language or one blockchain. That's irrelevant. It's all about what you're doing and that purpose and how that's wrapped up. And cryptocurrencies create, and NFTs as well, and DAOs, they all create the mechanics by where we can do very different and radical things as a society to fix some of the things that are wrong forever. And that's what I'm hoping very much, because the world needs it. Like, we need to start addressing things like climate change and poverty, inequality, and conservation much better, much faster than we're doing at the moment. And these provide the mechanics to create systems that can do that. And it's very, very easy to visualize that. We just need to sort of either get the rest of the world on board with the fact that cryptocurrencies are just the mechanics, or we have to bring the cryptocurrency world into a world that is doing good rather than making money. So,
and it's going to be a transition period, right? It's a transition.
Yeah, look, what it really needs is just the one landmark example, like one organization that steps up, does something really good and profound, becomes a global name, does it not as a cryptocurrency or as a DAO or an NFT, but using those technologies, but we're at a point where they hardly talk about it. It doesn't matter about this, like how you've done something. It just matters what you've achieved. And once someone achieves something really big, there'll be like cryptocurrencies. Bitcoin was created, and you had Ethereum, and then you had hundreds of others. As soon as someone does it right, everything else will follow, and then we'll start fixing some of the world's biggest problems much quicker and more effectively than we are today.
Definitely. And my feeling is, in the current market, the crypto winter, as people would say, there's still a lot of people building at this time. And we could see at the Australian Crypto Convention and everything else that's going on in the digital world. I feel like we're at that point where we can allow these good use cases to actually thrive and change the narrative around crypto, because the people who are still around are not just around for the money making. They're because they can realize there is a revolution that can occur through this technology. And I like how you've mentioned it. Eventually we'll get to a point. It's not about the technology. That's just the mechanism of how we're getting there. It's more around the outcomes and what we want to achieve and what we need to change. That's important. And that's what we need to focus on and get the public. I'm hoping these conversations get general public to, understand crypto in a different light. And that's what AgriUT Foundation is about as well, is, a unique positive use case of how we can use this technology as a platform to do good.
Absolutely. That's why we created it.
Yeah, amazing. Well, I think we are at time, and I'd love to talk about, I know that there's a couple of other projects that we're working on at the moment that are very interesting in the NFT space, but let's save that for a future episode, and we can bring in some of those key stakeholders. So I think just to wrap up, I'd say if anyone wants to support the mission of AgUnity or AgriUT Foundation, how would you say they can get involved to help support the vision?
Yeah, look, we have you run the communities. So we have a couple of, the first step is to get connected into the communities and see what we're doing. We've got tons of these videos that explain everything about AgUnit, everything. So, and we're a very transparent organization. So we really want people to first see what we're doing, understand, not just what I'm saying, but what the other team members are saying, what everyone believes, what we're meant to be doing. Because, all our investors and all our supporters today, they're very much aligned with our vision of the world. And that's what we want. We want other people that, they feel like, hey, this is doing good. I want to support this. And then reach out through those channels, because there's all sorts of ways from, we have a number of people that started volunteering on projects in different countries and things like that, and then eventually became employees. We have a number of people that have made investments in the company, and we certainly try to do the right thing by them. We've all, AgUnity's been constantly growing for 6 years, so all our early investors have done really well, and hopefully the current investors will do really well. And then AgriUT as well. I mean, I think, again, depends on what you are, whether you're a coffee, just a coffee consumer or a company, or there's all sorts of people that could find a really good way to use AgriUT. So dive into what we're doing and what we're talking about. And if you've got a great idea, then reach out. We've got all sorts of channels to do that. And we're welcome. We need more people to grow, to join with the vision, as I say, and then help us move ahead, because we can't do this with the resources we got at the moment. But hopefully, we're telling a story that resonates to lots of people.
I think you're right. It all starts with a conversation. So, if anyone listening is interested in what David's talked about today, please do reach out on any of our social media channels, and our team will get in touch and connect you with the right team member. So, thank you so much for your time today, David. I'm so looking forward to having more conversations around some of the other projects that, we've alluded to. And for our listeners, stay tuned for our next guest. We'll be hearing from Nuvritria, who is the program director of AgUnity, and she'll give some great insight into what work we do in the program side. So thank you, David.
Thank you, Carmen.
Bye.